Alright, welcome back. Going to pick up right now with phase two of the French Revolution, this era of radical republicanism from 1792 to 1795. Uh, Under Georges Danton, he's going to be the newly appointed Minister of Justice. He's going to take control of the sans culotte movement, this kind of common mass of common revolutionaries, and he's going to order the arrest of those who aided the monarchy. Uh, so thousands of people here are going to be imprisoned as the revolution becomes more of a bloody, kind of intractable revolution. People are going to be begin to be kind of massacred essentially during the latter parts of this second phase. There's going to be a organization of a new national convention. This takes place in September of 1792. Really serves as a provisional national government in all respects. Two-thirds of its members were under the age of 45, so it's quite a young movement, you might say. And most of, if not all, were suspicious of the King Louis XVI. So it's very kind of anti-monarchical here. It was comprised of two main factions, both of which were coming from the Jacobin Club, which had represented the kind of French middle class, the bourgeoisie, and lawyers and other professionals, artisans, and others. So even this kind of large group of the Jacobins is now beginning to fracture into these two smaller groups. The Girondins on the one hand, and the La Montagne on the other. So the Girondins are going to be kind of those revolutionaries coming from the provincial areas of France, kind of rural areas across the countryside. They were mostly fearful of the power of the mob and the influence that it might have, and they looked to keep the king alive as a hedging of bets, so to speak. That if even if the king could not be kept as kind of a figurehead of state, that was there wouldn't be perhaps as severe uh, nature or extent of reprisals should the French citizens, execute the king, Louis the XVI. Once that's done, there's no, reversing that essentially. So the Girondins here were very kind of hesitant as far as that was concerned, that kind of act. The La Montagne are here, and again, my French is probably terrible. Represented more urban interests, particularly in Paris, within Paris itself. They were more radical in their orientation of kind of revolutionary thought. They were more influenced by a mob mentality that was dominant essentially in Paris and its local government, the Paris Commune. And so these tensions between these two groups, the Girondins on the one hand and the La Montagne group on the other, they began to, kind of drift away from one another, antagonize each other in many respects. The Girondins wanted to again keep the king alive but in prison. They were fearful of the mob, but they were fearful of this mob that gave their opposition, the La Montagne, their political legitimacy. So, if you are, kind of suspicious of this large kind of, mob-like activity, then, this is not going to endear you to your opposition that draws its political legitimacy and identity from that which you are, kind of fear and are apprehensive about. Also, there is a class element to this as well. This kind of Parisian type of mob characteristic is beholden to the lower ranks of the social order, the French social order, and none the, with regard to all this, by 1793, it's really the mob-oriented group, the La Montagne, that their policies are going to begin to win out. So the Girondins here are not necessarily able to maintain any type of authority or influence over what's happening to the revolution, and helping to either guide it or affect it in any way. By a narrow margin, the National Convention decreed that Louis XVI was to be executed, and that occurred in January of 1793. Louis XVI was beheaded before a mass crowd in Paris, and so as a result, the old regime was completely and permanently destroyed in the eyes of the French state. This single act, of course, sent shockwaves throughout France and all of Europe. Again, if you're looking at this from the eyes of other absolute monarchies, you're saying, oh my, like this is a point of no return. That these revolutionary ideas have to be extinguished because that type of act is cannot be tolerated, and so it becomes a very, very kind of all or nothing, zero sum type of response, and it draws a pretty clear line as far as how you're going to align yourself with the revolution. Is this something that is a point of no return, and you're just not that revolutionary, or are you committed to the people's cause and what the nature of the people and their expression of political autonomy, which in this case means the execution, the public execution of what was their sovereign. So that happens, that kind of alignment, whether people are for continuing the revolution or become more kind of hesitant as to what this revolution is all about, as far as outsiders looking in on what's happening to France, it begins to affect how that where you fall in your support or rejection of what's happening begins to have repercussions across a large amount of the world, not only across all of Europe, but also across the Atlantic in the United States as well. Remember, during the American Revolution, it was France who was the key ally to the United States becoming an independent power. So now Americans begin to look at this and they begin to say, well, wow, how are we to grapple with this and reconcile this. I mean, we are a young republic in our own right, and now we see that the people are taking matters into their own hands. But what is to what extent should that take place? And so this is something that is to be kept in mind, and we'll come back to this later on in this lecture. But I wanted to make it clear early on here that this is going to be an ongoing kind of dialogue between factions and segments of society across much of the westernized world. Again, Europe, and also in North America, in the United States. By May and June of 1793, the mob disrupted the proceedings of the National Convention and arrested the Girondin and its leading figures. So it's beginning to go after the leadership of its opposition in many respects. The Paris Commune, again the local organ of government in the city of Paris itself, begins to put increasing pressure on the convention to enact a more radical agenda. Meanwhile, in the French countryside, where the kind of Girondin had more traction and more support, there was this growing opposition to what the radicals were doing in Paris itself. These were, again, more moderate minded individuals. In some cases they might have even been counter-revolutionaries. They favored, in some cases they began to favor monarchy over mob rule, just as a baseline for law and order. In places like Marseille and Lyon, they didn't want to be beholden to Paris and the anarchy that they thought was taking place there. They favored a more decentralized form of control within the French state, and in the hopes of limiting the influence that the events of Paris would have on the country as a whole. Combined with this kind of internal hesitancy or dissent, or however you want to characterize that, internationally, European powers, as I mentioned, were appalled by the execution of Louis XVI. As a result, Austria, Prussia, Spain, Portugal, Britain, and the Netherlands all began to ally themselves against France. They enjoyed early but temporary success on the battlefield. The National Convention, in response, gave political power to what was known as the Committee for Public Safety. This was led by Georges Danton initially, but eventually was ruled or headed by Maximilien Robespierre, and in August 23rd of 1793, the Committee for Public Safety called for universal mobilization of the French society, of the French people. This is basically a national effort to meet the multiple threats from this alliance that was arrayed against France. Within a year of this call, the French army numbered some 650,000 men. By September of 1794, the French army topped 1,169,000 men. This was the largest army ever assembled in European history up to that point. And it reflected, again, the intensification of nationalism that was really beginning to grip the French society. This was, in effect, a people's army. It was not an army of a particular king, governed by the and I should say commanded by the upper echelons of French society. This was a true kind of people's army that was, fighting for the survival not only of the French state, whatever form that was going to take, but also just fighting for the survival of the French people themselves. And as a result, through against considerable odds, but with overwhelming numbers and effective leadership, they were able to win resounding success. The French were able to win resounding success on the battlefield. They even went so far as to conquer Austrian-held portions of the Netherlands, and by May of 1795, the anti-French coalition that had been cobbled together was beginning to fall apart. Throughout this period, as France faced off against its external enemies, the Committee for Public Safety was also rooting out internal dissension as well. And this gets us into what's called the Reign of Terror. This is where you have a persecution of French citizens that may have had any ties to anti-revolutionary elements or held anti-revolutionary sentiments. If you recall from the E equals MC squared documentary talking about Einstein's equation, there was a piece on I'm trying to remember his name and I can't remember offhand, where there's a husband and wife right at the time of this period, the French Revolution. That is what, and eventually he's going to be beheaded. He's going to suffer his fate at the guillotine. Lavoisier is the guy's name. He is going to he's kind of this tax collector in his day job, but he's also this kind of scientist, obsessed scientist, in his free time. Since he's a tax collector, he's identified as kind of a state authority that these kind of Parisian members of the mob go after, and it's really during this period of time, this reign of terror, when Lavoisier is going to meet his fate. In a 9-month period, some 16,000 people were guillotined. By the end of the terror, some 30,000 to 50,000 are believed to have been killed. Your textbook puts the number at about 30,000. If you look at other texts for Western Civ classes, might peg it at 40 to 50,000 people. And these are people from Vendée, from places like also Marseille and Lyon. These parts of France that were, kind of looking to, for distancing themselves from what was happening in Paris. These are the types of populations that were targeted as far as, suffering the execution. Revolutionary armies were also particularly ruthless as they went across the countryside. If they were traveling through, say, a anti-revolutionary part of France, they may be particularly oppressive and punitive in their treatment of the people there. The same could be said for anti-revolutionaries that were also traveling through areas of the countryside and kind of taking matters into their own hands as far as exacting some sort of revenge. Notable victims in this reign of terror, I mentioned Lavoisier already, but Queen Marie Antoinette, the widow of Louis XVI, she is also beheaded. Olympe de Gouges, the woman who advocated for women's equality amidst all of this kind of greater emphasis on overall equality, putting forward the Declaration of the Rights of Women. She too was beheaded, as well as thousands of nameless, anonymous peasants suffered fates as well at the hands of the executioner at the guillotine as well. To give you some percentages here, it's estimated that 8% of these victims were nobles from the nobility, French nobility. 25% were from the French middle class. 6% were from the clergy, and 60% were could be classified as laborers or peasants. Um, there were some others, as we'll see in just a moment. But governing during this period of time, during this terror, uh, was justified in people calling for establishing a republic of virtue. The terror was seen as a process of solidifying the sovereignty of the nation itself. That there needed to be kind of this purging that took place. Anything outside of what was considered the sovereign was to be classified as an enemy. By the spring of 1793, as far as diplomacy is concerned, there were representatives from within France, and envoys from within France that were sent abroad to explain the emergency, why the terror was necessary or was being necessary at that point in time. There were kind of drives to win support, public support within foreign countries, including the United States. In 1794, there's a man by the name of Genet who's going to arrive in the United States, and he is going to make his way through the American states, calling for holding rallies and making speeches about the French Revolution, and people. He would even sign Americans up to fight overseas in the to go back to France to fight in the revolution for the revolutionary cause, and many people supported this because one, France was an ally of the United States. It was there was a very close association with France because it had funded America's own independence. It had recognized American independence, and so there was this obligation to now return the favor in many respects, and so when Genet held an audience with